Hey there, and welcome to a late edition. I was busy all day, uh, trying to solve some technical problems, and then spent some time with the family and was working on some projects. I don't know if you can see, I've got dust all over me. I was sawing and painting and doing a bunch of stuff. So finally, I'm going to take a little time because I was asking some, you know, friends that I chat with on a regular basis. And I said, well, I have some ideas for some vlog entries for today, but I'd rather, talk about subjects or, just throwing my 2 cents on subjects that might be of interest to you guys and what you're thinking about. So I threw that out there and went and had dinner, and I came back to this question, which I'm going to try and take a crack at. Um, the question was on the effects of IQ differences in a marriage and what would be the reasons for a person to seek out a lower IQ partner and different degrees of self-knowledge between partners as well as their desire for gaining self-knowledge and how important is it to be similar in this regard. And the person asking the question said that they were kind of analyzing their parents' marriage, and these questions were coming to their mind. Well, I mean, I'm not an expert in studying IQ, but I can tell you what my understanding of it is based on the stuff I've read over the years. Because it's a topic that comes up every now and again. I've heard things come up about EQ, and I've also followed some prominent psychologists and read a couple articles where they said, hey, look, you don't really get this widely in the media, but there are some things that science has pretty much determined about human intelligence. And the way I look at it, a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily widespread because maybe it's not very popular. Because I know that as I understand it, in the old days, they would give people IQ tests when they wanted to work somewhere. They essentially gave them some kind of intelligence test to see how smart they were, and then they would hire the smarter people, or maybe put them in jobs where they thought they needed smarter people, and then put other people in different jobs where they thought they would perform adequately. And the way I see it is, a lot of people who are executives and CEOs, they started out mopping floors and stuff like that. So clearly there's some mobility, and also my understanding of incomes is that while a lot of people start off at or near minimum wage, they don't tend to stay there throughout their entire career. So there does seem to be a fair amount of income mobility. But exactly how much, I'm not an expert in that, so I can't really speak to it. But so when it comes to IQ, people have been looking at intelligence for a long time, but after a while it became, I don't know if it was frowned upon, or I think possibly prohibited, because no one seems to do it, and that poses some challenges in the field of computers and software developing and engineering. I'm constantly looking at opportunities to interview people or go on interviews, and it's interesting to see the types of questions that people come up with to try and determine whether or not a person can do the job. And a lot of the questions that I'm a little bit critical of, they're kind of gotcha questions, or they're really common questions. And I've heard it, one of the things people have used to defend those gotcha questions is, well, it's kind of it is a little bit of a, I mean, you should be able to solve the problem, and okay, I'll give them that, but I think some of the questions are a little bit misleading. So I know that there's one called Fizz Buzz, and it kind of deals with a modulus. And at least when I think of that problem, even though when I sit down to code it, I can code it so that it works, I personally just tend to get all caught up in using modulus properly. And so I get kind of distracted by that aspect of it, and I don't really use that operator all that often. So even though the overall question is more about testing for program flow and doing things in the right order and coming up with Boolean expressions that help filter stuff out, and then usually people say, oh yeah, it's okay, just do this in pseudocode, but I still, I just don't use modulus enough, and that kind of bugs me. My style of coding is, first of all, I recognize how vast a lot of these languages are, and so there are a lot of libraries and sections and tools that I don't use very often if I know they exist at all. So a lot of times when I go to solve a problem, I'll go and I'll refer to the actual documentation. And I remember a conversation with a guy who is now the senior technical person for a major consulting company in my city, and he kind of yelled around the office. He's like, "Hey, anybody know what the default value of such and such is when when it's instantiated?" It was some type of object, and I said, "Well, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but well, I think he actually made some assertion that it was unknowable." And I said, well, it's not unknowable because it's documented. And one of the things that documentation for objects should show is what its value is when it's instantiated but hasn't yet been assigned a value. And sure enough, I looked it up and I sent him a link to it. And I just thought it was interesting that this guy, he was a very productive developer, in the sense that I remember one time we were debating whether or not the client should build a tool that would make our lives easier. And the client was hemming and hawing about it, but this guy felt that our productivity would benefit so much from having it built that he went home and coded it in a weekend. Now, every time I used it after that, I needed to go to him and get various things fixed about it. And in fact, it became kind of a running joke, is like, oh, I've got to go run his tool. 15 minutes later, I'm going to go to him with some kind of bug that needs to be fixed. And invariably, he'd fix the bug in 5 minutes. That was one of his slogans, is 5 lines of code, 5 minutes. I don't know. I think a lot of good developers and senior developers might see that as a little bit reckless. But, I don't know. That's what a lot of CEOs are demanding. And I don't think it's wise for them to demand it. I don't think they know what they're doing in that sense. I don't think they understand the ramifications and the cost. Another developer was, he was telling me that he thought that developers that weren't careful about the code they were, they were wasting so much company time that was being spent on developers and consultants, that it was really ridiculous that companies would fire people for stealing things like paper clips and office supplies, but would not fire people who made reckless technical decisions that cost the company millions and millions of dollars. He felt that on a dollar value comparison level, that should be right up there with high corporate crimes like embezzlement. So, but anyway, so it's really hard sometimes to find good people without some kind of intelligence test. I think in the military they used to use them, and I think they still may for the civil service exam in some respect. I know my dad was telling me, I know of 2 people in the military who they went in and they did really well in the intelligence tests. My dad was one, and he got a couple of opportunities to do work where they wanted really smart people, but oftentimes the work was also very dangerous. I think that's interesting. I don't think they want. I think the reason that they wanted intelligent people was because if they had dumb people, then those people would essentially be expendable. But smarter people would have an interest in self-preservation. I can only guess what the military's goal was in this. But my dad ended up working on intercontinental ballistic missile crews, and they wanted very bright people for that. They wanted people who would be able to complete the mission regardless of what obstacles they might come up against, because no one really knew what obstacles would come up against in nuclear war, but the whole concept of mutually assured destruction is that your missiles got to go if you get the order to launch it, because the enemy missiles are on their way. So, and then let's see, there was a guy that I heard him talk at my school once, and he was very bright as well, but he was in the Army during Vietnam instead of the Air Force like my dad. And in Vietnam, they were, I guess, having trouble getting fuel trucks and supplies deep in the jungle, and so they actually took a bunch of guys that tested really well, and they put these really smart guys in charge of getting truckloads of fuel through the jungle. And they, of course, didn't want to get blown up, so they found clever ways to do it. And as I understand it, those innovations helped a lot. So, and they ended up completing their mission much more often, so it paid off. So, with any kind of work, you're going to want, if it's critical, you're probably going to want to have your best people on it. And so yeah, there's been a little bit of debate about IQ and what it measures, and I think there was a book, I haven't read it, there's a book called The Bell Curve, which talked about some of the findings in intelligence research. And then later on, after the Bell Curve, I think one of the findings around that time was that IQ can't really be changed. You can't do like brain exercises. It's genetic, and you can't really change it. EQ sprung up at about that time because there were a lot of people that were selling IQ enhancement kits, and once the science came down against the possibility of that, then it was obvious quackery. So they started selling. They came up with a new thing called EQ, and my understanding is that there isn't any strong scientific basis that it exists, and it seems very coincidental that it sprang up at around the same time as IQ enhancement kits going away. And once again, it's essentially the same promise. It's that, well, okay, if IQ can't be changed, there's this EQ thing, which doesn't seem to exist, but you can change that. So, I don't know, it may be snake oil. It seems likely from what I've heard, but like I said, I'm not an expert, so by all means, share what you know in the comments. Links to scientific studies would be appreciated. So anyway, there's this question, is the effects of IQ differences in a marriage. And wow, I've just seen so many couples in my life, and some of them seem to be about as smart as one another. One of the things, as I understand it, is that, and I thought this was really interesting, is that women are, the deviation among women is not that great. They're all about the same intelligence, and people think that may be because of evolution, because women are fundamentally responsible with the survival of children and the offspring, that they can't, that nature can't risk the chance that a woman is going to be incredibly unintelligent. And so the good news is that if you're a woman, you're really, really probably pretty smart compared to the average human. It appears, though, that men, they can kind of, I guess nature can take some chances on them. And so that's when you start getting experimentation. So like the far reaches of the intelligence spectrum, the dumbest people that have ever lived were apparently men, and the smartest as well. And those are the far fringes, and then there's more of like a subtle hump in the middle. And as I understand it, IQ is centered around 100 as the mean, and so you've got half of the people below the average and half of the people above it. There's a famous George Carlin quote. I don't want to butcher it right here, but you can look it up, and it's, like half, just think of how dumb the average person is, and remember, half of people are dumber than that. So it's funny, but from what I understand, so 100 is about average, And that's one of the things everyone talks about, a jury of your peers. But as I understand it, a jury of your peers is actually an average person. So if you're average, it's a jury of your peers. If you're below average, then it's a jury of a bunch of people smarter than you. And if you're above, average intelligence, then it's a bunch of people who aren't as smart as you. And in both of those, for anyone other than average, this sounds kind of like a raw deal to me. I was in jury duty one time, and I was an engineering student at the time, and there were a bunch of people that were called to be on a jury, but they were not allowed to be seated on a jury. Or we got called up and run through the ringer on the questions and everything, but we never ended up sitting on a jury the whole week. So we ended up playing bumper pool and doing jigsaw puzzles together. I was an electrical engineering student. There was an attorney. There was a chemical engineer from a major chemical company in the area. There was a fuel cell researcher from a major automotive manufacturer in the area. There was a logistics expert. I'm trying to remember if there was anyone else, but pretty much everyone that was not seated on any jury the whole week. It looks like those were the only people. It seems like a bit of a pattern. They all seem to be very analytical thinkers that were highly educated. And so, as someone who, spends a lot of time thinking about how I should conduct myself, I don't know that a juror of, my concern is that I think it would be the job of the attorneys to help to first of all understand what my thought process was, and to illustrate that to a jury of supposedly average people in such a way that they could understand it. I mean, I don't understand how we end up with justice through medical malpractice cases, for example, if you don't have a jury of doctors. If you just have a jury of lay people making decisions about whether or not what a doctor did was right. And yeah, you get expert testimony and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think a jury of your peers might be better if it were a jury of actual peers. The same goes for people, from what I understand, people who tend to be criminal, they tend to be of a little bit lower intellect, in the IQ 80 range. And I don't know if it's exact. It's not exact, but I don't know if it's how far around that it's clustered. But those people, they're going to have a tougher time with the jury because, things that will just naturally occur to the jurors are not going to occur to these, less intelligent people, and that could lead them to do things in a criminal way when they might otherwise, if they were a little bit smarter, have not done that. And the way I understand it is that people who are IQ 80 or so, they tend to be more inclined to criminal activity because not only can they conceive of doing criminal things, but they are also smart enough that they actually can pull it off a significant part of the time. And so they're only getting caught some of the time, but they're not smart enough to think of doing crime, but then they're smart enough to pull it off. Then there are people who are a little less intelligent, and those are people who, even if they did conceive of a crime, they wouldn't really be smart enough to pull it off. And so that's why one of the explanations I've heard for why it's clustered around 80. Up a little bit, you start getting into the college professor range, which I think is around 120 on average. There's a guy named Bill Wittle. He has a YouTube video out there, a couple of them discussing what he calls Island 120, which is his theory, and I don't think there's any known scientific basis behind it, but I think he makes an interesting case for it that warrants further study. But yeah, it's essentially this idea that if people with an IQ that are 20 points higher than average, they kind of tend to get together and look at each other and like, hey, we arrived. We're the sharpest knives in the drawer, and they tend to forget that the spectrum goes higher and stuff like that. So, and it's interesting when they do encounter someone who is brighter, they tend to be very skeptical and kind of think that there's some kind of trick, or if they if that person, you know, asks them a question that kind of puts them on the spot, especially in front of people, then instead of responding with like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, you do raise a good point. I'm going to have to look into that and learn about it more, and I'll get back to you. They tend to respond a little more aggressively and out of anger because their position on the island is being challenged. So I encourage you to look into Bill Whittle's stuff and let me know what you think about the Island 120 concept. But anyway, that's just a rough, you know, for starters, that's kind of my overview of what I understand a lot of the current science in IQ to be. And, you know, there could be new stuff out there, and, you know, that's just as I understand it. So if you're a professional, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. But anyway, the effects of IQ differences in marriage. So, you know, it seems to me that there are some people out there, I've seen some professionals who they seemed to, they were pretty smart people, but for whatever reason, they didn't seem to like to be challenged. And so they seemed to go with someone who looked up to them in a lot of ways, especially intellectually. And as a result of that, they weren't going to really rock the boat or anything. So it was a way, by picking partners that were less intelligent, it was a way to, in their personal life, maintain an illusion that, you know, they're the smart one. And even if in society overall they weren't necessarily all that bright. So that's one thing that I've seen, and you know, it comes with its drawbacks because, you know, maybe the partner that's less intelligent isn't, you know, is enough, you know, is lacking enough that they can't really make decisions properly, and it can result in some headaches. I've certainly heard stories about that kind of thing. But yeah, it's and then there's the other way around, is like sometimes people want someone who's a real problem solver so that they're not going to have to really think about a lot of stuff other than, you know, mundane basic things and relaxation and that kind of thing. So I've seen it, I think, you know, go both ways. I personally think that, you know, I view a relationship as like a partnership. I mean, when I was looking for a wife, I looked for someone who I thought was a lot smarter than average, you know, people. I looked for someone who I thought was very capable and you know, able to solve problems in clever and unique ways. Someone who was creative and also who knew how to, you know, put together available resources to solve problems in ways that I thought were above average. So yeah, so I mean, that was my personal strategy, and you know, I've heard that you know, one of the explanations for, you know, one of the things that people need to think about is their children. You know, so a lot of people kind of assume that if two really smart people get together and have a child, then that child's going to be really smart. But from what I understand, there's this concept of regression toward the mean, so it's not necessarily so. And this may explain some of the cases where someone who is like an intelligent professional goes and has a couple kids, and one of the kids, you know, doesn't ever really amount to anything. They might start doing criminal stuff, or they might just, you know, not take care of themselves and, you know, become destitute or something like that. I think there are a lot of presidents and, you know, very famous people who have well-known less successful you know, siblings and stuff like that. I think in my family, I was, you know, pretty well off in that sense because my brothers are both really smart. You know, they're all on, you know, either engineers or on track to be engineers. And my grandfather, he was like a maintenance man at the end of his career, but he did a lot of work with electronics in the early days, especially radio and TV. And you know, he struck me as a kid as, you know, probably the smartest person I was exposed to on a regular basis. So he was always getting into new things and like doing weird things like reading Popular Mechanics in French because it was a subject that interested him and he wanted to brush up on his French. So yeah, and then going back even further, you know, people who ran their own successful businesses, and doctors and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think that it would make sense that if I were trying to make a smart person, I would probably try and put together two smart people. But there's the other thing too, is that there's also wisdom, I think. And so even a person, I was talking to a guy today, and he said, well, those of us who aren't that smart, we just spend our time compensating by lifting weights. And he didn't really say compensating, but he said we make up for it by lifting weights. And I was telling him, well, the funny thing is I know a lot of guys who are really bright that I work with, and they they all seem to be deadlifters, and so it's kind of funny because these are bright guys that do lift weights. So it's interesting. So yeah. So the effects of IQ difference on marriage. One thing that I've seen that can be a challenge. If so, let's say two people get together and they have really smart children. That can actually cause some friction in relationships, because and just out in public and with the family. I've seen people who were pretty dominant figures in the family, and when a smart child, especially a child that's very young, like a very bright toddler, if they come along and they start having interactions with these dominant people who maybe aren't as intelligent, then the dominant person comes up with a lot of reasons for finding fault with the small child. And I've heard warnings that a lot of times people will think that a child is older than they are because of their intellect and the way they present themselves and the things they know about, but developmentally they're still their actual age. So so essentially people project ahead that the child is older, and then they frown upon when the child acts their age in other areas. There was the thing I didn't have a lot of time to do much research on this subject beyond what I'd already heard, and that's how I'm trying to present this. This is stuff that this is my understanding, and I'd love this to be a dialogue. I'd love to hear more about it, from what do you know about it, and what's the basis for that knowledge. But there was a quote saying that everyone is a genius in some area and an idiot in others, and I certainly feel that way on a daily basis. Is there are some things that I feel like I know a lot more than my friends on the subject, but then other areas where I get stumped and I need to go to them for help. And I've also heard people say that whenever they're in a room with people, they try to find out, regardless of how smart they are, there's some trick that they know that you don't. And so if you can figure that out and exchange it, then you can end up better off for being around the other person. And I think those are healthy ways to look at it. But yeah, so I think there's the possibility for friction. Like, what do you do if a lot of people are intimidated by children that are smarter than they are. And I think it's really interesting how people react when that's the case. And I think that it's important, I think that it's really important that people just focus on, teaching the child what focus on that bit that you're an expert in, and don't try to be everything to that child. A child is just trying to learn as much as they can. So teach them what you can and hand them off to experts for other stuff that you don't know about. There's the thing is, I think my mom was very bright, and she's still around, so I get I get to benefit from her intellect on a regular basis. But she was interested in things that were more traditional, like needlework and doilies and ribbons and all this kind of stuff that didn't really interest me all that much, but I learned a lot by being exposed to it, and I learned a lot tangentially. And I think when you love someone, you develop an interest in the things that they're interested in. So you know, I didn't realize it until later on. A friend of mine was a master gardener, and you know, we'd be walking along, and I'd go, oh, and, you know, and I'd recognize some flower or plant. Now I don't know all the ones in Ohio by a stretch, but you know, I think I did a quiz that someone posted on Facebook or something, and I nailed it. I got like 100% on naming, you know, common Ohio flowers and stuff like that. So, you know, I think you just, you know, if the way I look at it is that just pick up everything you can and let your mind sort out what's important. Um, so let's see, what would be the reasons for a person to seek out a lower IQ partner? Well, I mean, I think I talked about the reasons to seek out a lower IQ partner. I mean, there could be other reasons, but I think one of them seems to be not being challenged and being able to dominate the other person when it comes to, you know, making decisions. Um, I don't necessarily think that's a good way to base a relationship, and I think it can also backfire. I mean, as I said earlier, you know, if the person makes a lot of mistakes because they're not all that bright, and it can cause a lot of headaches. So now, one weird thing is I know some people who are on the lower end of the intellectual spectrum. I've been really surprised to see that there seem to be people of average intellect that are interested in pursuing them romantically. And it'd be interesting. I don't know enough about the situation to know the motivations behind it and stuff, but I thought that was interesting because, you know, I hear, I worked with a woman who objected to, she said she never ever wanted to date a man shorter than her, which was, she was already tall, and then she went around and wore heels all the time. So that kind of narrows the playing field if she's going to wear heels and she's already tall. But yeah, I mean, I haven't really heard women talk as much about intellect, but you know, I'd be interested in hearing from the ladies who are subscribers about what they think about the motivations. You know, why would someone seek out someone who they think is not as smart as them? I mean, I don't know all the motivations, but you know, I've run over a couple. So different degrees of self-knowledge between partners. Well, I think that's independent from intellect. I mean, I think smarter people are generally going to be more interested in discovering, you know, exploring themselves mentally, like trying to understand what their limitations are and how they can be better and stuff like that. I don't know. But yeah, different degrees of self-knowledge between partners. Yeah, I mean, I think where that can run into trouble is if one person is on a quest for self-knowledge and the other one is absolutely disinterested. That can result in the person who's interested. I mean, like I said earlier, if you love someone, you start, you know, taking an interest in the things that they love, and you know, so that you can share in it. And if that person is interested in knowing themselves, I would assume it's because they would like to better themselves. That it's not just to know themselves, but they also want to explore their strengths and weaknesses and do more things with their life that take advantage of their strengths and do what they can to mitigate and hopefully eliminate some of their weaknesses. So that's probably, you know, that's what I would look at when it comes to how different degrees of self-knowledge. I mean, I think it's going to be way better if both people are interested in trying to better themselves, because you know, otherwise one of them's going to probably, intentional or not, end up getting in the way of that quest. So, and you know, who wouldn't want, I mean, I don't, why would someone want to get in the way of that? You know, if whether it's a business partner or, you know, if someone is saying, you know, I'm really trying to be better at everything I do, whether intentionally or not, why would someone want to stand in the way of that? Because it benefits all who have a relationship with that person, in my opinion. So promoting self-knowledge seems like a good way to go. Let's see. Yeah. And how important is it to be similar in this regard? Well, I mean, it depends on how effective you want to be. I think it'd be really hard to be on a, you know, to be trying to figure out as much as you can about oneself. I mean, for one, is if the person, I would assume that a person who's good at exploring themselves from a self-knowledge perspective is going to be good at giving honest feedback to other people. And I think marital relationship is the closest relationship that I know of. So that's really, that's the person that you can confide in if you're going to get some feedback on how to be better, or a true assessment of yourself and who you are. Who better to provide it than your spouse? I mean, I don't think that's going to be something that's good coming from a therapist, or I mean, that's where someone could get it. Or kids, or maybe kids many years too late after the kids embark on a process of gaining self-knowledge. So yeah, I just think that it should be really important that people are on board, and that if there's going to be an interest in improving themselves, that that both people are able to help in that regard, and that worst case scenario would be that when a person discovers that the other person, or it's revealed to them, they're like, hey, I've been really exploring self-knowledge, and I've been looking at the reasons why I do things and how I feel about things, and just really trying to get in touch with become self-aware. That's probably a bad sign if the person is like, uh-oh, don't want this happening, and then either consciously or subconsciously gets in the way of it, or impedes it in any way. So yeah, I can't see how that's gonna end positively. I mean, I don't think anyone starts getting interested in the concept of self-knowledge on a whim. Like, oh yeah, I saw a billboard or something about, it said self-knowledge, or I was reading a book, so I figured I'd look into it. I don't know. I don't think that's how it happens. So it's kind of something that people should probably adapt and be supportive of. So, well, I think I've gone on for long enough. I mean, especially because, like I said, I don't really know. I don't feel like I'm an expert. These are just some things that I've thought about, and some off-the-cuff thoughts about what may be the case. And if you know someone who if you know someone who has very similar intellects, or different intellects, and I'd be interested in hearing stories on how those relationships worked out in case I get more questions of this regard. I was kind of blindsided by it. I was actually, I plan on talking about it later, but I was just going to talk about organizational tools, which I view as kind of a process of self-knowledge, is trying to figure out what works best for you so that you can achieve the most you can do. So I figured I'd periodically touch base with what my current approach is, and where I got some of these ideas, and how I implement them, and stuff like that. And because that's one of the things that always interests me when I meet someone who I think is very effective and productive. There's usually some kind of system that they have, and I really like to see what that system is, how it works for them. It usually isn't for me, in that it doesn't really mesh well with what I'm doing, but it's always interesting for me to hear those stories, and find out what people are doing. And there are parts of them, and parts of what I do today in that regard, I got from other people who were sharing that kind of information, so I'm really grateful for that. So anyway, yeah, I noticed I've got a few new subscribers and stuff like that. Let's see, it's technically Wednesday. It's probably a little, yeah, it's past midnight, so it's not Wednesday anymore. But I was going to say, for hump day, I was going to just suggest maybe if there's one person that you think this video, they might be interested in the content of this video or whatever, maybe you can think of just one person, and maybe just share a link with them, and see if they're interested in subscribing. I know I'm not a professional vlogger by any sense. In fact, my whole point is to just turn on the camera and throw the files together and throw them up on YouTube. Very minimal operation here. So but still, it's nice to have a little bit of an audience. Last I checked, I was around 55. So, if each of you, got one person to subscribe, then that would be great. And I don't expect that, but it'd be neat. So anyway, yeah, and by all means, think about it and let me know what you thought. I've already been getting some feedback from other people. I like to, if I have a specific question I can try and address, I prefer to try it that way than to just dream up things to talk about, because then I at least know that one person is interested. And if I get comments and feedback on the videos from the other people in my audience, then I know at least 2 people were interested. So that's good. I don't feel like I'm talking to a little box in my basement. So, but tomorrow I'm on the road again, so I'll be doing the vlog from my car in the morning. Have no idea what I'll talk about then. It was really funny. I was telling someone last time I vlogged in my car, I pride myself in driving very safely and well. And at some point I'm going to start splicing, and I have front and rear dash cams, so I hope to find some time to splice in interesting driving shenanigans that get recorded while I'm recording my vlog, just so maybe you can see why I made a comment or had some reaction. I think that'd be fun. That'd be a neat and unique element to add to my vlog, because I've seen a lot of people vlogging in cars, but not a lot of them splice in actual 1080p dash cam footage of what was going on. But yeah, it was kind of distracted because the last time I was doing my vlog, right as I got on the freeway, there was a police cruiser that got on the freeway behind me, which I wasn't planning on doing anything wrong, but you never know. And I didn't really want to be pulled over on camera. That's not what this channel's all about. But then later on, I ended up, that was a local city police officer, and then after that, there was a state trooper that was, they're the State Highway Patrol. They ended up getting behind me, and it was just like, I occasionally see Highway Patrol, Sheriff, Police, and Border Patrol. Here we are, 200 miles from the Border Patrol. But it is a capital city, so I don't know what they're up to. But yeah, we get some Border Patrol cars on the freeway in the mornings. And yeah, it's just kind of when you're trying to drive and then also have an intelligent and engaging conversation for people to listen to, it's a little bit distracting when you're also trying to drive completely within the confines of the law, which, I have a lot of practice at doing that. That's my general approach. But like I said, all it takes is one mistake, and then next thing you know, you're explaining to an officer that you won't be saying anything to them. So anyway, that's it for tonight. Be sure to like and subscribe. My horrible website, it's a test site, but it has some information that you might be interested in, is marknoble.com. And on Twitter, I'm Mark Noble. So check things out, and like I said, if you thought this was interesting or have anything to add, please share. Talk to you later. Bye. Oh, and just to give you an idea of the kind of low-budget setup I'm going for, I just wanted to show you my rig really quick. This is, I've got a cell phone that's linked to the GoPro to give me some kind of feedback video while I'm talking, and then I've got a lamp with a old plastic grocery bag. Here's the bulb, and hopefully I'm not even going to try and turn it on. It'd just wash stuff out. And then over here is oh, there goes the camera. Well, the phone, but it's fine. So yeah, it fell off in an earlier video. But yeah, I've got a grocery bag, and then there's like a GoPro mount here, and that's my studio right now. So I don't know. I'm not really interested in it getting much more sophisticated, just for simplicity's sake, but I just kind of wanted to show off how crappy my setup was.